Hello, everyone. I'm Jean-Claude Beyond Mystic, and welcome to today's special report. Black Monday, October 28th. With me, of course, is the one and only Mr. Andy Sheckman. You can find him at milesfranklin.com. Andy, welcome back to the show. How are you, man?
JC, man, it's great to see you. Thanks for having me, buddy.
Excited to have you on. You and I were supposed to do a show last Thursday, but we had some conflicting issues on our schedule, and we figured, let's do a Black Monday episode. And people are asking, why Black Monday, JC? What's going on? Well, let's go back in memory lane here. On Black Monday, October 28th, 1929, the Dow Jones Industrial Average declined nearly 13%. What's interesting is that we seem to have a setup for similar events to occur right now. And that's why we titled this episode Black Monday here today. If you guys saw the show last night with Bix Weir and Penny Kelly, we did bring up some of the latest data or WebBot data from Cliff High. And in there, he's talking about some headlines of bankers jumping off buildings here in the very near future. So it seems that there's a lot happening in the background, Andy, that could lead us to a situation similar, of course, to that famous Black Monday. What are the things on your radar right now, Andy, that suggest that things might be difficult here just ahead of us? In our last interview, you mentioned that this bank lending program was due the day after the election, and just that in and of itself, with all the unrealized losses at the banking level, could create this cascading effect and bankers jumping off of buildings. But what else is on your radar, Andy?
Yeah, and I know I owe you a shirt, a picture of me like that. I've been too busy for my own good lately. Things have really accelerated in my world, and I call it like a quickening, I guess you could say, but yeah, it's hard to ignore. So, JC, to me, there's some things that are screaming right now that it's almost like this is intentionally done to catch people off guard. It's proper that I set the stage. You can interrupt me at any point, but you have to understand, I think, the chronology of it. On your show, I've spoken plenty about Silicon Valley and Signature Bank failure. Yeah. But leading up to that, of course, we talked about bail-in legislation. During the Dodd-Frank Act, they wrote bail-in legislation in to replace bailout legislation. And I have always commented on how I feel it's crazy that so few people understand bail-in legislation. And since I didn't get a chance to speak with you about this, I did talk about it last week a good bit, but it's really important for those people who didn't hear me talk about this last week. And I'm shocked to find that I'm talking to people every day. Like today, I did an interview with Sean Fu, and he had no idea about this. And these are people that are well-read and have big followings. So we go back to the Dodd-Frank Act. They said bail-ins will replace bailouts. And maybe more troubling to me in the back of my mind is money market gating legislation.
Right.
They don't pass these laws for shits and giggles, right? They pass them because they see a problem in the future and how to protect the system. So bail-in legislation would protect the taxpayer from ever having to bail out the indiscretions of these big banks, meaning the depositors are unsecured general creditors, i.e. last to be paid. And FDIC has about 140 or 50 billion in assets backing roughly 18 trillion in deposits. It's just a few cents on the dollar in reality. And then they also impose money market gating legislation in the same time, because when Lehman fell, it controlled a lot of the money market funds. And so people tried to pull their money out. And it's not just you and I in money markets trying to get yield instead of being in a savings account earning just a few percent. We'd rather be in a money market earning 2-3 times that with daily liquidity. Mm-hmm. To get anything commensurate at a bank, you have to do a CD for a year.
Yeah, a year.
So everyone leaves the banks, they go into money markets, but you have half of that money is institutional, like pension funds and insurance companies. It's a big deal. So the government said, well, if this happens again, and a bank that holds a lot of the money market funds like Lehman fails, we will implement money market gating. You're gated, you can't come out. You go down to the bottom of the ocean with the ship, in essence. And I find it eerie that there's $7 trillion right now, nearly, in money market funds that everyone thinks they're being conservative and safe. And of course, David Rogers Webb, The Great Taking, would shine a light on that. But in particular, the money market gating is very troubling. All right, so we fast forward. Those banks fail. And we've talked about this. The inquiry that the House did, it's ironic that it was the Oklahoma senator that said to Madam Secretary, you just bailed out these banks. Yep. It's illegal, Dodd-Frank Act. And she said, you're right, Senator, it is, but we deemed it was an uber majority vote of the FOMC, the FDIC, myself, and the president. It would have brought down the system. Forget about the fact that it was Oprah Winfrey's money and the Silicon Valley startups and Hollywood money, hundreds of billions, or millions rather, hundreds of millions, if not billions, in uninsured deposits. And they were all made whole. Well, Janet said, it won't be at the expense of the taxpayer. Senator, FDIC will cover it. Yeah, right. Well, he said, well, does that mean if a bank fails in my hometown in Oklahoma that my constituents will be made whole? No, Senator, they'll be bailed in. It would require an uber majority vote once again. It's too systemic, in other words, of the FDIC, the FOMC, myself, and the president. Yeah. Okay, good to know. So let's fast forward to a week ago Friday. First National Bank of Lindsay fails. And this is a little podunk town where you have only 7 million in uninsured deposits, right? So I want to read to you because it's important people understand this. I'm just going to read it verbatim. Okay. Friday, the First National Bank of Lindsay was closed by the Office of the Comptroller of Currency with the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, FDIC, appointed as receiver. The OCC acted after identifying false and deceptive bank records and other information suggesting fraud that revealed depletion of the bank's capital. The OCC also found that the bank was in unsafe or unsound condition to transact business and that the bank's assets were less than the obligations of its creditors and others. Keep that in mind. Its obligations and its are greater than its deposits, than its assets. So far less assets than obligations. That's the first thing to keep in mind. The OCC is referring this matter to the United States Department of Justice, which has a wide variety of tools to hold individuals accountable for criminal acts and focuses on victims in all of its matters. To protect the depositors, the FDIC has entered into a purchase and assumption agreement with First Bank and Trust Company based in Duncan, Oklahoma, which will assume the insured deposits of the failed bank. The sole office of the First National Bank of Lindsay will reopen as a branch of First Bank and Trust Company during its normal business hours on Monday, October 21st. All depositors of the closed bank will automatically become depositors of First Bank and Trust Co., and their insured deposits will continue to be covered by the FDIC. Customers are not required to change their banking relationship to maintain deposit insurance cover. Now, here's the kicker. For uninsured deposits, there were 7 million. The FDIC has announced it will make 50% of those funds available to the depositors starting Monday, October 21st, with the possibility of increasing that amount as assets from the failed bank are sold. So what does that mean? You have $1 million in that bank. You just bought up your dream house for $1.25 million, and they're building it. You put $250,000 down on the lot and the construction loan, and the bank fails. But it's in the bank, right? Well, that you get $250. That's uninsured $750. You get half of that $375. That's $625. That $375 remaining is gone. They have 4 years if they want to pay you, if they have the ability, from the assets of the bank where their assets were far less than their liabilities, to creditors and others who are others. But if you get paid back over the next 4 years, which it says the possibility, which means you ain't getting anything, it's in the form of bank stock of the new bank. Right. So this is something people have no idea is coming. Yeah, your people do. You and I do. We've been talking about it ad nauseum. And this is why I feel a lot of times I'm redundant, but the redundancy doesn't get out there. And if you can help one person along the way not get screwed like the people in Lindsay, Oklahoma, little podunk Lindsay, instead they bail out all the Hollywood and Silicon Valley execs, and they let people in middle America get screwed. And it's ironic that it was the Oklahoma senator who chastised Janet Yellen, and now we see this in real time. So how hard would it have been for them to come up with 7 million instead of 3? No, what they did was, or 3.5, what they did was, is they are throwing a trial balloon at the market. Boom. See,
I
we
was just
told
going to
you
ask
now.
you. This is a
Yes,
trial balloon. They're trying to see
yes.
if they can get away with this.
And you can't see it
Yeah.
anywhere.
Yeah.
If you look for it, you won't find it. You got to really dig. Even if you type in Lindsay Bank, you don't find anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's a scary, scary deal as far as I'm concerned. And it is, in my opinion, the lighting of the fuse of the banks. And yeah, we told you it's right there. Go to the FDIC website. There are a few local. I was doing this on a live stream last week, and I get a comment from someone. Yeah, man, I live in Oklahoma. It's nowhere to be found. I can't find it anywhere. It's not on any of the news stations. So
Incredible.
Just enough to say we told you so, just a couple of crumbs, but it's a big deal. Imagine if a big regional bank fails, a big one. I mean, the first thing people would do would be run to pull out all their money out of the banks, which would then create a run on the banks. And this chain reaction, this systemic chain reaction, could be very problematic. Speaking of banks, how about, what is it, $3 or $4 billion fine to, as we were talking about a year ago, to TD Bank, and yet, just a slap on the wrist, money laundering to the nth degree, pay $3 billion to the Justice Department. You can still keep your job and keep your business. It's crazy what this world is coming to.
Right. Absolutely. And on top of that, when people say, well, maybe it's just a small bank, it's isolated. When you look at this chart and you realize all the unrealized losses is still this glaring problem that appears to be 10 times or 15 times higher than it was in 2008, we're not out of the woods. And so when Andy says this is a trial balloon, it could be the first of many here. And at the same time, we're getting pressure on the dollar from everywhere else around the world. We just had this BRICS meeting last week, again, suggesting here that the tectonic plates are shifting. Putin just introduced here with the BRICS meeting this new currency for the BRICS, as well as maybe fighting words with respect to gold and silver. Here in this article, he's talking about removing the COMEX and LME from this market rigging operation. So that seems to be fighting words. They haven't been that direct in the past. How do you see this unfolding? Let's look at the precious metals complex here just a little bit. We'll get into the reserve currency and what's happening to the US dollar in a moment. But what's this attack right now on the gold and silver riggers right now? And again, in the WebBot data, if I bring up the slide from last night's show, Cliff High had it in there that we had, I think, November 7th was the first couple of days here where we were starting to see a pivoting point here with respect to the silver markets, that Russia was waging war on silver markets here. And we were starting to see the manipulation break, the ratio breaking of gold to silver. This is just a couple of weeks away. So it seems to me that it's tied in now to some of these shot across the bows here from Russia. What do you make of all of this, Andy?
Yeah, well, it's true. I mean, in terms of Russia waging war on silver, they said that they would be accumulating it for their state stash, more or less, and governments haven't been doing that, at least openly. It's only been gold. And so you have them now accumulating gold, silver, platinum, and palladium, and large amounts of it every day for this month and for the next month, and they'll continue to do so. They're also, the largest producers of platinum and palladium in the world, and I don't know where they fit into the rankings in gold and silver, but you look at China at the same time. There's this three-prong attempt that is going on, in my opinion, even before we discuss this, which is important. What they've been doing for the past several years is gradually depleting the above ground stockpiles in the Western exchanges. They've been using the suppression against us. They know what we've been doing. One of the things they talk about is the grain exchange. It's something they've talked about here at this last meeting. Well, when they talked about it a year ago, the guy that was discussing it said, we produce and consume more grain than the West does, yet we can't control the price. It's controlled on COMEX. But when this grain exchange is formed, that will change. Well, they understand we're doing that with all the commodities. So they've been using this suppression against us to deplete the above ground stockpiles. That's number one. And then what they're doing is creating greater volume on their regional exchanges. Like on the Shanghai exchange, they're the liquidity and the security of it is getting noticed. In the past 6 months, the volume's up over 500%, and it's greater volume when you measure the Shanghai Metals and Futures Exchange combined than the COMEX. It's outpaced it. And when you trade silver on the Shanghai Exchange, you buy a bar first from the refiner, one of 6 or 7 approved refiners who laser etches a serial number on it that is attributed to your contract, where on COMEX it's 20, 2,000% rehypothecated, where they sell that same 1,000 ounce bar contract to 20 other people with the same certificate number, but no one knows because they're not all going to cash in at the same time. And most people don't stand for delivery, if at all. It used to only be 1%. So you could rehypothecate. And the third thing that they're doing is they've been acquiring resources before they reach the Western exchanges. They've been going.
You're talking about the doré bars?
The doré and the concentrate. So they're doing all of these things. And now they're like, okay, let's build our own exchange, because they realize that there'll come a point when these exchanges in the West are viewed as a Ponzi scheme, where on the LBMA, they're trading 3.5 times annual global mine supply per day, 90+% is paper. So they will siphon as much away as they can. They'll get as much away from the miners as they can. They'll start to arbitrage on their website, on their exchanges, listing silver at a 10% premium to the West, anything they can, and then bang, they'll set the price themselves. These will be the exchanges that will control the real price, because they're the ones that are buying it. They are doing legitimacy in the way that they conduct business. They're the ones who own it, the ones who appreciate it. It's a big deal to see them do this. It is a shot across the bow. It's just a way of saying, we know your system is rigged. We've been exploiting it. Thank you very much for keeping the prices low. But there's going to come a time when we're going to be the ones that set the price, and you're going to have shipped all of your metal to us, and it ain't coming back. Certainly not at the make-believe prices that the West has tried to hold these things down at for so long.
Right. And given this BRICS meeting, can you, in our last interview, you were mentioning that you weren't sure we were going to get the smoking gun, the gold-backed currency, but you thought that we would have a little bit more clarity as to the rollout of it. So they kind of introduced this new banknote, which I'm still confused as to its utility. Now, in some cases, Putin was saying, well, we're not really going after the US dollar or creating alternatives to SWIFT. We're just going to do international trade within our local currencies. He said that during the meeting. But at the same time, he had this announcement of this particular BRICS currency banknote. How do you detach the two here, the two statements?
I think that was more of a marketing piece, because you have Mexico on that banknote.
Right.
And, so it's more of
as if maybe wish list kind of thing? Okay.
It's not real.
Right.
I mean, it is real, but it's not their currency. I think it's kind of showing what it will look like, the whole system. 47 more countries have expressed interest in joining, we find out.
Right.
26 formally applying. And they've talked about a lot of things, for sure. They've talked about, during the meeting, BRICS Clear, which is an independent cross-border settlement and depository system, a reinsurance company, BRICS Reinsurance. They talked about BRICS Pay, which is a retail, from the public to the retail, business to business form of paying amongst BRICS currencies. It will integrate with your iPhone, Android, and Apple, or a credit card. They have moved in a way where they said, yes, we are still working on our common settlement currency, the unit. Again, the instructions to trade in local currencies during, the next year. This is something that, and that's why I was very careful to say I didn't know if it would come out. I know they'll talk about it. And that's why I didn't want to say, they're going to issue it. I mean, it's moving in that direction.
To me, so far, my takeaway from the summit last week was, more interest, more people signing up. We're getting a little bit more clarity on BRICS Pay, some of these networks, eventually this currency, this banknote, what it could look like. But really, the kicker was the frontal attack on the COMEX and the ALME. They were clearly suggesting here that they're going all-out war in the precious metals. That's kind of my outtake. Would you add anything to that, and maybe
Yes.
explain why that is? Maybe.
I would add that I agree with that, and maybe the whole commodity complex with the grain exchange as
Grain too.
well.
Yeah. Okay.
But also, what it seemed to me was that they wanted to show the world that they have their shit together,
Yeah.
in the respect that they are finding commonality through unity, and cooperation. As an example, they made a big deal, even though Saudi Arabia is straddling the fence on being admitted into the BRICS. We know that they're a full participant in Enbridge. They've joined the New Development Bank. They've joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They're part of the Belt Road. They're in essence playing both sides of the fence, but they are now having a joint military exercise with Iran, Sunni and Shiite. They've hated each other. Chinese brokered a peace deal last year, made a big deal about it. They're building embassies supposedly in each other's country at some point, but now they're going to do joint naval exercises. And Xi Jinping and Modi meet on the sidelines and discuss the border, and are reaffirming cooperation and peace through unity and a common goal. This was not done, I think, unpurposely. They want to show that that these countries are not feuding with one another, that these countries are able to look past their
They're
their
dismantling somehow the narrative that those guys were all isolated. They're saying,
Yes.
no, actually, we're all together. You're the ones who are getting isolated by the process. That's what they're saying.
Yes. The one thing, JC, that I all of a sudden my head kind of exploded, and I'm having a hard time wrapping it around, the fact that I started thinking this in an interview I did with Michelle McCory the other day, and I blared it out, and I'm like, well, maybe that's it. She said, when I said the Bank of International Settlements is also behind Enbridge, some will say the Chinese are trying to distance themselves from it, but she said, well, isn't the BIS a Western institution? I'm like, yeah, it really is. These are the central bankers. And what I'm getting at is that, the BIS reclassified gold as tier 1, and they're behind the Enbridge, and Saudi Arabia is a full participant on Enbridge. And what it seems to me is that this is more an issue of bringing down the Western system, putting everyone on a same level. And you have, instead of being a one world currency, if you read the stuff that came out of this meeting, it was like, whoa, I didn't see that coming. Like, they want to follow the United Nations Charter. They want to follow the WHO and vaccinations. And they want to live in a world where, even though they want a new Bretton Woods system, well, yeah, but they want, this within the IMF framework. So they're talking IMF, WHO, United Nations, Bank of International Settlements. Well, these are all the same idiots who are over here.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, well, hang on a second. What are they doing? Is it the threat to the dollar is real? But what I'm getting at is that it's like you have the same bankers pulling the strings on two different groups, on the BRICS and on the West, and yet they're all saying they're integrating, in essence, their frameworks into this same digital thing. It's like, you're not going to have a one world currency, but how about a one world system controlled by the people at the top? Now, maybe I'm wrong, I don't know, but why the hell are they bringing all of these Western institutions into? They published like a 40-page deal on it, and I couldn't believe when I was reading it. I'm almost like, are you really?
Is it a question of fuck, meet the new boss same as the old boss?
Yes, that's exactly what it is, man. And yet, but each one of these factions will want to be the stronger of the group,
right?
But in the end, what I come away with is that we're moving to a CBDC, whether we like it or not. And this is the way the world is going, and that these countries will prioritize commodities and natural resources, but when it's all said and done, they make a big point about Enbridge being compatible with other systems. It's not compatible with the dollar, but how about Project Agora and Project Cedar? that the Federal Reserve is behind, and they are compatible. The IMF and the Fed, these are all very, and you see Kristalina Georgieva from the Fed from the IMF say a CBDC not pegged to something is fiat. Well, does that mean they're going to peg it to gold like Enbridge and the unit? What I'm getting at is that it's like, just when you think you've escaped the matrix, no, there's a whole nother layer of it. And it just seems like the people pulling the strings will still be pulling the strings, but it doesn't change the fate of the dollar. It's as if this is a plan from the highest up above to reset the system and then issue a new one backed by CBDCs where they can integrate with one another globally for trade, but still controlled by the same, dark forces that are pulling the strings right now. Maybe I'm wrong, but I mean, it woke me up like, bang, like, whoa, what did I just read? I mean, I didn't see that come. I've been reading this stuff for 4 years. And now all of a sudden they're talking the WHO and vaccinations and IMF and really? And the United Nations.
Is there the possibility in there? I have 2 points of view on that too, because I listened to a video from Dick Allgaier the other day. This was an offshoot of the Joe Rogan Trump interview, which was forecasted by Cliff High in 2009. The remote viewers looked at it in 2019 or 20, and we just had this temporal marker occur last week. And what Dick is explaining in this particular video, you guys can find it on his Future Forecasting Group YouTube channel there. He says, we're moving into what Cliff High calls a sci-fi world, and he explained a little bit what Cliff meant by that. But from his perspective, he kind of just repeated or said what you're saying now. We're moving into this new financial system around the planet. It's going to be a unified planet, and it's going to account for basically all the souls and the transactions and all the commodities on the planet in one system. So he's talking about this digitized tokenization of basically everything.
That's
here.
The same thing that I'm saying. I mean, that's what it appears like. I think he's right, because here you have a system that seemed to be breaking free from the West and all the craziness, but yet they're being subservient in some ways, at least in terms of what they're saying they're going to do to this Western system.
Yeah. And so on one hand, I hear you. I see that. I'm cautious, and I'm how do I say it? I want to keep their feet to the fire as they're announcing these new projects and services to the population on Earth here as we move into this new system. And at the same time, I can't help but wonder. There's always a tactic of, when they say, "Hey, keep your friends close, but your enemies closer." Is that also perhaps what the BRIC is doing now? Maybe paying lip service to the WHO, the BIS to bring him in.
Well, I thought about that.
Overtake them at some point here and change the game completely on the West.
Maybe great minds think alike, because I thought that immediately, and I still wonder that. I mean, that's kind of what Saudi Arabia is doing. That's what Turkey is doing.
Right.
Turkey has formally applied to the BRICS, and they're a NATO member. Saudi Arabia turns down the G7 meeting, but sends its delegates to the BRICS meeting in Novigrad. Saudi Arabia hasn't fully accepted the invitation to join the BRICS yet. They're in the Belt Road. They're in the New Development Bank. They're full participant in Enbridge, which, according to Delma Rousseff, will be the platform to trade the new settlement token.
Right.
They're doing everything but severing or ties with the West or angering the West. You could say India's kind of doing that. You could say Turkey's kind of doing that. This is a high stakes game, I guess, until everyone's ready to, it's easier said than done than to, turn your back on the West, even though they may want to.
As I've been looking at this for a while and seeing Dick's presentation and what you just said now, like, I've been oscillating between both scenarios, and I can't make my head or can't make a decision as to which one is moving forward. And maybe that's where we're at right now. The world is in limbo, and it's up to you and I doing shows like this to wake up more people to kind of have a say into this and to vote, whether that's consciously or at the local level in politics, but at certain point, or with our feet. They say vote with your wallet. The consensus, though, whether it's scenario A or B, it appears that more emphasis and more value is going to be put on commodities.
Yes.
And so, is that still the strategy here to get, okay, at the very least, it's get out of harm's way, but maybe potentially also better your position in this new system? Is it the route to go here right now with commodities as opposed to all of these money markets and these stock markets? What do you feel still is the safest
Yeah,
way?
I mean, it's the only way to get out of the way of counterparty risk.
Yeah.
And it just seems to me counterparty risk is a whole lot scarier than people will give credibility to.
Yeah.
And, you know, when you're a little kid and your grandparents give you a piggy bank to put your nickels and dimes and quarters in from your, you know, your allowance, you grow up thinking the bank is safe, and it's not.
Yeah.
So if the bank's not safe, if the money markets aren't safe, if securities aren't safe, if treasuries are becoming unsafe, if the insurance companies aren't safe, what is safe?
Yeah.
And there's no safety really in anything. I mean, we live in a world where things change, but to me, it is unquestionable that we are moving to a world that will be dominated by commodities and tied to liquidity through blockchain technology.
Right. We
That
kind
is
of
something I see as clear as day. How it all unfolds, you know, everyone says I'm not taking that CBDC. Well, if there's an event that happens that precipitates, you know,
Yeah.
banks and insurance companies and whatnot failing, and this type of cascade, yeah, you're going to take it if it means either that or not feeding your family. So
Right.
I don't know, JC. I think it's
Well,
it's
maybe not. Again, it's a question of educating people and having people understand really what the choices are. And for the most part, this is why Hillary Clinton is, screaming in the top of her lungs in the last couple of months that they need more censorship because they're losing control. Then we need to continue bringing out this message. Somebody in the chat is saying, "JC, Andy, so what you're saying is we're screwed regardless." No, not what we're saying, but there is still danger ahead of us, and
I
there's
mean,
still.
and yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
don't think you're screwed. I mean, if
Yeah,
the assets that are going higher in dollar terms are gold and silver, then get out of the way of it.
right,
And when the dollar collapses or the dollar starts to really lose ground or a new system comes about, you'll have options when others have none.
right,
And it's either you give up and you just swim in the same pond that's everyone else is funneled into, or
right,
you don't.
right.
And
And
you
that's
have
the key
options.
there. That's the key. You don't, because these guys, in order to perpetuate these programs, they have to have our consent and our involvement into the system. And if enough of us say, hey, no, we're outside of the system and we can live outside of it because we have our commodities and we don't want to play your rules, that's kind of what happened with COVID. For the longest time here, because you just mentioned the COVID passports and all that stuff, they wanted to force us through this vaccination process, the COVID passports, to eventually give us that COVID passport and then the digital ID. They missed that mark, so they still need to force us through it someplace else. But the last time, and even though a big portion of the population did take the vaccine, eventually this failed, and everybody said, no, this far no further, we're not doing this digital ID stuff. Here in Canada, the bank announced, whether that's a ruse or not, just a couple of months ago, that they've dropped the idea of CBDC altogether now, that there's just no appetite for it. Now, is that a bait and switch and they're working on something else in the background through the BRICS to kind of confuse everybody? Maybe, but that's why we have to have these conversations and keep everybody on their toes here moving forward. I totally agree with
Yeah,
you.
well, I mean, and you start by creating one bank bail-in, just a little itty bitty. No one
Mm.
really knows about. Shh, don't tell.
Yeah,
And then what happens if it starts to cascade and brings down the system? Then
yeah,
what will people's willingness be to take a digital currency if it's the promise of being made whole? I don't know. I'm
right.
just saying that things are so crazy now. It's like you have to start thinking this way, or if you don't think unconventionally in unconventional times, you get rolled by the changes instead of rolling with them. When you at least see what's coming, you
Yeah,
can maybe even get out of the way of it. That's the way I look at it. I'd rather have options, and maximize what you can do within the bounds of legality, and do what the biggest money in the world is doing. The
right.
central banks, they're showing you with their actions that this is where smart money is going.
Let's bring in Trump in all of this. So there's the Trump Rogan interview last week, which was a game changer in many ways. We got to see a guy unedited for 3 hours, being asked questions and having a conversation that really made him appear to be more human than the mainstream news is trying to portray him. And just in the last week, there was over 5,000 articles about how Trump was Hitler incarnate, basically. And people got to see, well, actually, we didn't see that in an interview. And at Madison Square Garden, also, they tried the same thing. And again, a huge success. They didn't see that. But all through that, on that day, Trump was wearing this gold tie, which looked like a gold brick tie if you zoom into it, and he had this black and gold MAGA hat. Now, you and I have talked about this before. We played a video where he said something to the effect that we were here in the United States moving into a golden era, and I had suggested that, well, some detractors would say that he's talking about the oil beneath our feet. He said many times, "Drill, baby, drill, baby, drill," but at the same time, as Big Swear was saying last night in the show, there's evidence to suggest that we do have way more gold than we think we have here in the United States. He was making his case here for the Grand Canyon last night in the show. Is Trump maybe the outlier to this BRICS taking over the West through the Bank of International Settlements, the WHO, and all that, in terms of creating something new attached to gold here for the United States that would be basically saying F you to the BRICS? Do you see that as an opportunity here?
Well, the fact that he acknowledges it, that he said that we're losing the reserve status. He talks about countries moving away from the dollar would be met with, sanctions or tariffs or whatnot. And as I mentioned, Judy Shelton's brilliant. She would be his nominee. She was his nominee the first time. If they swept the House and Senate, then she would be the head of the Federal Reserve. She is an advocate of the gold standard, and she would say to you, look, no matter what people say, we went 180 years with having no inflation and the greatest prosperity the world has ever seen, the increase in it, when we were on a gold standard. That she talked about issuing 30-year treasuries that pay 2 or 3% in interest but are redeemable in gold at the end. She talked about those kinds of things, so she understands it. He understands it. We've talked about the gold revaluation account. Yeah, why not? I wouldn't put it past him. He's said things that are acknowledging that no one else has said forever. And doesn't mean I agree with all of his policies about how he would deal with the BRICS countries, throwing more sanctions and threats and this and that, but it would not surprise me. And this is how you would do it. You would beat them to the punch. You would back your currency, your new system with gold quickly, or beat him to the punch. But yeah,
well, how about this? When you say beat him to the punch, there's another outlier here too. At a Bronx event just a couple of weeks ago, this gentleman on the screen was asking Trump about the American dream and how we're being taxed when we make the money, we're being taxed when we spend our money, and everywhere in between, and it's now impossible to live the American dream. I'm paraphrasing what this gentleman was saying. And he was asking Trump, is there a way, perhaps, once we've cleared out our debt and make America strong again or stand on their feet again, that we could come away from this income tax and maybe go back to the tariffs model? And twice in this interview, Trump said, yeah, there's a way. And he went on to explain that in those times, the country was so rich that they had to hire these committees on how to explain to them how to spend all of this money. And he said there's a way back to it. Although he didn't explain it, he did say that as a possibility. And then he went on the Joe Rogan show now, which millions of views later, suggesting that, yeah, it was very much in the cards here to remove income tax. And so the tariff could be that, how do you call it? Kicking the wheels for the BRICS nations here too, to say, okay, you guys have done this, but if you want to deal with us, you're going to pay all these tariffs. So again, I guess leveling the table or leveling the playing field with them. Could that be where he's going with this?
Well, it would sure be met with great enthusiasm, no question about it. And
for here in the country, in terms of not paying income tax, yes, but not for the other countries who are trying to sell their wares into our country. That would be devastating to them, as he was suggesting could be the case with the automotive industry.
You'd be surprised, when you let people keep more of the money that they make, that they spend it in the economy. Yeah. And the revenue would probably be greater if you implemented like a flat sales tax and tariffs or something along those lines. The income tax is immoral as far as I'm concerned. And it would be met very enthusiastically. Mm-hmm. And we should, the fact that you have to more or less have a PhD to do your taxes these days, it's crazy. And as far as income taxes are concerned, I can't think of anything that would ever be that popular if there was a way to pay for it. Now, keep in mind that, when you impose these tariffs across the board, I mean, it's not like either the countries will say screw it, and this crystallizes their desire to work with the rest of the world, or they just increase their prices, which means that the West bears, the consumer bears that higher price. But what it would do would spur on and incentivize
Manufacturing here in the States
to be made in our country.
Yeah, because some would argue that in this globalization effort starting maybe in the 80s, that the Americans and here in North America, generally speaking, has lost its manufacturing base, and this would be a way to bring it back. Yeah,
and there would be a time lag and some pain and whatnot, but
that added to. But think about it. That added to what he mentioned in the Joe Rogan report. He talked about his uncle, John Trump. And so he was kind of tipping the hat to maybe Tesla and some of the technology. John Trump had access to Nikola Tesla's files when he died. He was at the Office of Foreign or Alien Technology, I believe was the name of the department at the time. And so there's long been rumors, and we're in the Wu land here, that Trump might be declassifying some of those technologies. So adding that declassification of technologies, he has mentioned part of that here in the last couple of months on the campaign trail, added to this innovation boom and this new drive of manufacturing in the States. We could very much be living also the stepping stones here to this big innovation boom, as Cliff High calls it here.
Well, I'll tell you, the Wu world is something that I've grown to respect a lot more since I've met you. And not only that, there's a show called The Y Files on YouTube that I watch all the time. It's a really great show. And they did a show on the Great Pyramid of Giza and also Nikola Tesla's technology. And the show is mind-blowing if you read it, and why JP Morgan went out of his way to not finance Tesla and bankrupt him in essence, because it was in direct competition with so many other things that they had their hands in. I didn't know that his uncle had access to it, but if you watch the Y Files episode on this, in essence, the ability, free electricity is what it basically is it's pretty shocking, pretty amazing, especially when you bring into it the Great Pyramid of Giza and the residue on the shafts and all of this stuff that speak to what you're talking about. I won't give it away, but people should watch it, the Y Files. It's really, really, really great
really show. Good channel there. Yeah, absolutely. In 1943, 3 days after the death of Nikola Tesla, the Federal Bureau of Investigation ordered the Office of Alien Property Custodian to seize Tesla's belonging. John Trump at the time was called to analyze the Tesla artifacts, right? So Trump kind of mentioned that he's a smart guy, he had all this access to technology. So he's been hinting at the fact that he might be releasing some of this technology here to answer at least some of the problems and making America great again. So I think it's interesting. But at the same time, if you want to go woo, Andy, let me remove this one. I want to bring something up on the screen for you guys also. Let me see if I can find it. This one here. So present your screen. We'll do a tab for this one. When Cliff High says universe is talking to you and you just have to listen sometimes, did you see this?
I love that. I mean, that's my favorite damn thing, man. If that isn't karma, I don't know what is.
Right. So let me play this. It's just 30 seconds for the audience members here. So this is Janet Yellen answering again, because we kind of mocked at her response last year when she was asked about this BRICS meeting and the world reserve currency being challenged and the dollar will be remaining strong for the future.
When I first saw this, JC, I thought it was like AI in a skit.
Me too.
But it's not. I mean, that's the craziest thing of all.
Okay, so welcome to the Woo Guys listens to this.
Thank you, Colby Smith with the FT. You've described calls for widespread tariffs as deeply misguided, and the IMF today has warned that such policies will dent global growth. Can you elaborate more on the near-term economic impact of these policies and over a longer time horizon? How concerned are you about the potential impact of the dollar's status as the world's reserve currency?
Let's see.
Right when they say, how long are you worried about the dollar retaining its world reserve status? Kind of boom.
Boom.
I mean, if that isn't
That's
like,
universe talking to you. Come on.
that's just one of those deals that you can't. I mean, that's perfect timing for sure.
I know. I love it. All right, thanks, guys. Yeah, that's hilarious. Everybody's saying in the live chat there. Andy, okay, so listen, buyer beware. It's interesting also because in the last 2 weeks or so, Janine and I have been receiving a lot of emails, and viewers are saying that other researchers and YouTubers have suddenly kind of shifted gears with respect to the economy and the financial shift we're living, to where before they were pushing out maybe what some would describe as hopium, and now suddenly they're kind of warning people, oh, you might want to prepare, you might want to get some gold and silver and all that, and things might be a little bit rough here around the corner. And so I thought, well, why now? Why are they shifting gears now? You and I have been saying to everybody, prepare since the beginning. We've had a lot of flack for it sometimes too. Oh, you guys are so pessimistic. Trump has it all and the White House. We understand, but at the same time, it's always better to be cautious and be prepared than to just let it out to somebody else to preserve your wealth and hard-earned money, right? In this hopium kind of scenario that was being pushed forward in the last couple of years. So now they're changing their tunes. Why do you think that is? I think it's because we're very close to this event. It appears also that perhaps some of them might have been told to, hey, change your tune here because things are not going to go well for you. And on that note, let me just share this, Andy, for your consideration. It was at the bottom of the list of headlines that Cliff just pulled out yesterday for our show. Let's see if we can bring this one up. This one here. There you go. He says, there you go. QFS and Zim scam, Nasera Jacera scams are dying rapidly next February. We have a temporal marker of a shooting near fatal of a QFS guy in a public setting. Big viral thing in the woo world. So something's happening here to where retribution might come to those who were pushing some of these scams moving forward. Why do you think there's that last minute change right now, Andy?
Because I think you have to be asleep to not feel this charge in the air. You have to not be paying attention to not know that things are changing. And I think even people that are the worst sufferers of recency and normalcy bias know things are different now. And you're even beginning to see things, the establishment turn on one another within the media. I just think that you know the old saying, well, that's not even going to work, but let's just say that this is something that has reached such a level that it must just be impossible to ignore for these people. I mean, I don't know how you ignore so many of these things that should make everyone look at the world a little bit differently, challenge their biases, challenge what they've always known. And maybe there are some people with a little bit of moral fabric within them and they're trying to clear their conscience, or maybe they just are waking up to the fact, like I always say, there are a lot of very well-read people who just have learned to read the wrong stuff. And therefore they're well-informed in the wrong information. And maybe some of them are stumbling across reality and saying, whoa, like I better reevaluate. So it is interesting. And I've noticed that too. I mean, I think and this is, these people's way of saving their skin as well. Like to Cliff's point, right. You can have beliefs, but if you realize that those beliefs are not real, if you continue to espouse those virtues and to talk people into doing something that could harm them financially or whatever, health-wise, medically, financially, morally, spiritually, you're going to get some vengeance. And I think that's what he's saying. And there, I go on people's shows, who talk about things that I may not completely and totally agree upon. I don't ever say that I agree upon what you're talking about, Mr. Show, who's I'm on, but there are other facets of what they talk about that, I'm okay with enlightening people on. I'm not going to throw anything or anyone under the bus, but I don't agree with everyone. I have an open mind and I listen to what everyone has to say.
Well, that's the point. That's the whole point of doing these shows and having
Yeah.
different points of views, is to not be in an echo chamber where you're not served. Because going back to your statement you just said, is similar to what Cliffy was saying. You can ignore reality all you want,
Yeah.
but you can't ignore the consequences of ignoring reality. So
Well, that's
this
just
is what,
it.
right, exactly.
That's just it. But
Andy,
I think what Cliff says is very interesting. And it also I would add to that, Gerald Celente says when people lose everything, they lose it. Or another way of saying it too is that, there's going to be, I think there's gonna be an awakening, and people are gonna freak out. I think what he's saying is very interesting. Look at CNN. Look at how they've led people down the wrong path for so long, or look at 60 Minutes with the interview. Or, I mean, there's been so much deception, and maybe that comes along with people finally waking up and seeing that they're part of something that isn't really what America is all about. And maybe that's a good thing to a degree as well. Can't hear you, JC.
sorry, my dog was barking.
No, that's
this is MSNBC, of course, doing the same thing as what you're describing here, leading people down the wrong way, making these parallels between Trump and the Nazis here. Interestingly enough, though, none of that transpired during this Madison Square Garden event. And at the same time, one of the opening songs there, as Alan Greenspan is suggesting on the screen there, was Enter Sandman, the Metallica song. Huge crowd here for that event. Speak about that very quickly here, this project, what it means and where we are in that timeline right now. Is this live? Is that activated? Are we days away from this happening? What do you think?
Yeah, you could argue it. I mean, I don't know. Operation Sandman is 100 and however many countries, 30, 40 countries, who have all agreed to shed treasuries and dollars at the same time. They call it the night of the switch. I do believe it will happen on a Sunday night, whenever it is, if it does happen.
Right.
And it's logical if you think about it. I mean, I get it. Wouldn't surprise me one bit at all. I think the big money, the sophisticated countries who don't align with us have realized that this is the Achilles heel of the West.
Yeah.
The treasury market, the commodity market, all of these markets that have been manipulated and suppressed through suppression of interest rates in order to maintain this illusion is the Achilles heel. And asset prices that have been blown sky high, where price discovery isn't really known. And the same thing is true with the opposite, with metals, because they've held them down to support the narrative. Sky high gold and silver, is the canary in the gold mine, and it speaks of frailty and of the system and problems with the system, inflation and misallocations and whatnot. So they killed it. But this it goes to speak why price discovery isn't known on gold and silver either, to the upside. But everything else in a 40-year period where interest rates were manipulated straight down from 1982 on,
right,
created the biggest boom this world's ever seen in financial assets, but distortions in asset prices. And if you realize the money supply is up 14-fold since 1980, silver's selling at a 40% discount to it. It's because you have 8 banks holding it down in the West that are creating the existential threat to their survival, losing billions of dollars as the price keeps going up, and they're suppressing it. For what reason? We've talked about what I believe it is the military-industrial complex and the need for silver and high-tech weaponry. You can't let silver get out of control. But these countries know it, and that's why they're buying it all around the world in doré and concentrate. They're producing it. They're buying mines and buying anything that's not nailed down. This is how they win. And this is why when they get to that point of extracting as much value from this system as they can, that's when you would see an Operation Sandman. If it were at the behest of all of these countries in coordination, I could see that happening would be a scary experience in the United States.
It was just interesting, the gold tie, Enter Sandman. So there's a lot of, the tariffs, the removal of income tax. We seem to be entering a new world. At least that's what if you look at the tea leaves, what appears to be in the background.
Those are the
Now, you
crumbs.
mentioned
Put them together, and I would rather say something like that. Say, look, this, and this, are they a coincidence or not? But at least be aware. And now you're not surprised when it goes this direction. And those are the
keep it in
kind of
your
things that
radar.
I talk about all the time.
Exactly. Keep it in your radar. Another radar, of course, is the canary in the coal mine, as you said. We're at all-time high here in gold. Silver is not there quite there yet, but the last time you were on the show, you had told the audience that silver needed to close over 32.50, I think it was, here to get into this new territory. And you said that between there and 50, there was very little resistance. Well, we closed over that last week on the daily and also on the weekly. Today, we're sitting at 33.88 USD right now on AppMex. That would suggest, as Bix was saying last night in the show too, that there might be some dead banks walking in the back here too with some of these silver short positions. And if we go to 38, 39 in the next couple of days and perhaps 50, as some analysts were saying here, we could be close to that. What does that do to put more stress on the banking system? And is that potentially what Cliff High was picking up here, where he's seeing these bankers jump out of buildings here starting November 7 onward? And also what was interesting, this one here, more people going to a hospital basically in panic attack symptoms due to financial structure death. This is what he's picking up as headlines here for the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, that's scary and sad. Well, I mean, you got record high credit cards, you got record low savings, record high debt. That's not a good, and an economy slowing. It did close above 32.50, and there is one little technical spot at 35. It gets past 35 on a close, it's off to the races for sure. But 32.50, it kept hitting its head on for a long time, and it got through that. Now that would be the new floor, and it seems to have held on the latest pullback. And so, we get above 35. There is no resistance on the way up.
And going to the banks and maybe shorts, who might be in trouble behind the scenes here? Any guesses to who that might be and what time frame that could be until we actually see it in the public here?
Well, I mean, it's growing by the day. These banks on the LBMA are short between 4 and 6 billion ounces. That's nothing to ignore. And silver goes up $2. They're down between $8 and $12 billion. So and on COMEX, it's about just under between 700 and 800 million ounces. Those same banks. So you're talking massive losses. Silver's up 40% this year. It's pretty much outpaced all the commodity complex, including all the precious metals. It's playing catch up. But I think what could very well happen is that you see a close above this. And see, this is what these countries understand. This is how you win. Stand for delivery. 8.1% of all the silver in London was delivered in the month of August. So not too fast to create a force majeure or blow up the system before you've extracted it all, but fast enough to where they're draining the Western system. And at some point I could see that, it's like 8 of you robbed a bank and the heat's coming down really, really hard. One of you says, screw it, I'm out. I'm out. They'd said, if one of us comes clean, that we'll walk with immunity. I'm out. It's the rest of you. Good luck.
Yeah.
I think that's what's going to happen, and not the immunity part, but the part where it's one of them's going to break under the pressure and cover, or they go out of business. I mean, you talk about an existential threat. These are real, where when you're short naked like that in an environment where you can't get the metal, not only would your company suffer huge losses if one of these banks were to happen. These banks have their finger in everything. It's not just precious metals. It would immediately blow up the credibility of everything they touch. And all of these banks are incestuously combined or connected.
Well, with the credit default swaps through
the and that's why we had to bail out AIG, because the default swap market was so much that AIG would have blown up, the reinsurer of the insurer. So, I think that could very well happen. And when Bix used to say that the silver was the linchpin or the Achilles heel, I never really got it until I started digging into it and see that, one of these banks blows up, it's game over, because it will resonate and reverberate through all sorts of asset classes. And it's a scary deal. They understand this. the rest of the world does. So
Yeah.
I think, silver's potential in a short covering event like that, not to mention it's been held down forever, not to mention it's our 6th year in a row of a structural deficit, over 1.5 billion ounces short over the last 6 years, about 240 or 50 million ounces short again this year between supply and demand, which doesn't even take into account military applications. You now have Russia that is going in and openly buying it for the country. China.
That's crazy fundamentals positive without all the rhetoric of war and everything else that's happening with the BRICS nations.
Yeah. Well, and all the rhetoric is hiding the reality of what they're doing. And the Western media doesn't speak one word about this, that all of these countries are finding assets to replace the treasury and their commodities. And that's how they would rather save in an environment where the treasuries are losing confidence and or a market willing to buy it at these rates with the potential risk on multiple levels. And instead, they'd rather have commodities, which they know are vital, with no counterparty risk.
Yeah. Indeed, before we go, you sent me these great new specials last night for the show with Dick Swear and Penny Kelly. What do we have here with the gold and silver Britannias on sale for the audience?
So I want to make sure if our new ones haven't come out yet, which they may have. The silver Britannias are great, no question about it. This may be a new one. Let me see.
Okay.
Yes. So it looks like they're still available. 1/2 ounce backdate maple leafs, which are 110 over melt, and the 1 ounce silver Britannia, $299 over spot.
Yeah.
And we can still do the junk silver halves, and from a standpoint of utility, there's nothing better.
Right.
That's a great value. But all this stuff is available and in stock. And look, I would say this, as far as the rest of the year goes, there are no guarantees in anything, but typically the mints run out of product in right around
Didn't they just stop
mid-November.
making silver eagles last week also?
Yep,
That?
we're done doing that. And the 10th ounce eagles, there are none. They're done. The gold maple leafs aren't available until the 2025s come out, the 1 ounce.
Yeah.
These are backdate that are for sale. So things start to disappear. You throw into it, a Molotov cocktail into whatever reason. I think the real craziness comes after the election, but normally you're talking a void of product between, the holidays and the new year. Not only that, mailing stuff throughout the holidays is tough. So if you're thinking of getting some before chaos shows itself, if it does, now's a good time to do it. These are good choices. As far as I'm concerned, great prices. We do still have some silver eagles in stock, but when we're sold out, we're done until 2025s come out.
Okay, very good. So guys, at beyondmystic.net/silver there, just fill out the form and let Andy know what you guys need. And also, if you're on the Canadian side of the equation, you can go to mfbullion.ca. There this week, we have the 2 ounce silver Canada Goose on special here at $409 over spot here for our Canadian customers. So that's mfbullion.ca for Canada and beyondmystic.net/silver for the American audience here today. Andy, anything else on your radar coming up for next week? Of course, the election. Anything else? This bank lending program that could be, or anything else Black Swan related that's on your radar right now? You want to share with the audience?
Not really. I mean, I just think that it's eerily quiet before the storm, so to speak. And I would just
wait today.
Be prepared for the unexpected. I mean, who knows? Honestly, if I had to guess, I would say that's when it gets nuts. I mean, you're gonna have half the country angry and protesting, and if I left Minnesota because of that crazy protesting. God forbid we see more of that on a national scale, and let's hope that President Trump wins to clean that kind of shit up and go back to the ideals that made this country great. Law and order, respecting everything from the nuclear family all the way up to your police officers and your school teachers. And, we were just a better country when we respected. You didn't have to agree, but you can be respectful. And that respect for, this new left-leaning world we live in are supposedly so tolerant to all sorts of lifestyles, but yet when it comes to difference of opinion, they're anything but. And I'm concerned not for what will happen if Trump loses. I'm more concerned for what happens if he wins. And either way, as the Chinese curse says, may you live in interesting times. So buckle up, JC. I look forward to talking with you about it. I'm sure there'll be lots to talk about a week from today.
For sure. Thank you so much, Andy, for being here today.
Actually, a week from Thursday. I take that back. A week from Thursday.
That's right. And guys, please join me, of course, this evening at 8 o'clock Eastern for the next edition of the Breaking Moves. This is on the IAP and pay-per-view channel here at beyondmystic.net. Love you guys. Have a great day. And thank you again, Andy, for being here.
Yeah, JC, you're the best, brother. Thank you, everybody. See you next week.